Welcome to the field. I'm JJ, and the Easter weekend of footy is in the books, and we saw some upsets. We saw some thrillers. The eggs were delivered. The eggs were eaten, and I'll tell you what, the eggs were certainly delivered and demolished here in East Geelong. But let's get stuck straight into the footy because of Easter Monday, and then the quick turnaround to gather around on Thursday night. There's not a lot of time to review and then preview, so we'll get stuck straight in. Richmond, I called Richmond and Sydney on Sunday afternoon. I probably went there thinking the Swans would slice and dice, but Richmond proved again in footy, in all sports to be frank, but certainly in our game, there is no answer to pressure. There is no magic cure to pressure. Now, two sides of this coin. So I thought if Sydney, well, we know Sydney would bring that kicking game, that handball receive, that running game to the MCG. They do it well at the SCG where it's a bit tighter and smaller. So the MCG should suit them even more. Now, Richmond's challenge was obvious. Don't bring the pressure or the appropriate amount of pressure, and Sydney would cut through them. But bring the heat. Bring the noise. Bring that famed 2017 to 2020 level of pressure, and Sydney's ball use will give them some opportunities. And Shea Bolton led the way. Both Riolis got involved. We saw some pressure from so many Richmond players. And then that allowed Nick Floston become an absolute wall down back. He had close enough to 30 possessions. Heap of intercept marks. He took a crucial mark late in that game. And Richmond got their first win for the season. Unfortunately, they lost Tom Lynch and Noah Bolter and maybe Liam Baker, depending on when you're watching this and how his appeal went. So that's not good. But certainly to get a win in the win column for Adam Uze and the guys. We spoke to Jaden Short on AFL Nation after the game, and he just spoke about how much it means to get a win, just to prove that your training is actually what you think it is. So you think and tell yourself you're training in a positive manner and you're doing the right things. But when you don't get the results on the weekends, you start to question all that. So they had a win in the VFL, a win in the AFL, and the Tigers again. Now, this will be something we can talk about all year long. There's no answer to pressure. And no one has got any more or less right to bring pressure. I used to talk about this with Nigel Lappin at the Cats. You know, Richmond, famed pressure team. Collingwood, a famed pressure team. You know, other teams who bring the pressure. Fremantle back in the Ross Lyon days. Oh, what do you got to look out for? Their pressure. Well, why do they have a right to bring more pressure than we do? Pressure is just effort, intensity, chasing, not giving up on the small things, going the extra inch. Any AFL player can do that. So why do Richmond have the right to bring more pressure than their next opponent? Why does Melbourne have more right to bring more pressure than Adelaide on Thursday night? Shouldn't Adelaide be more desperate? Adelaide are winless. Melbourne are airborne. It's at the Adelaide Oval. Who says Melbourne has a right to bring more pressure? But pressure has no answer. There's no magic cure when it comes to pressure. So we'll track that throughout the season. The teams that can bring the best and largest amount of pressure will be the teams that are there at the absolute end of the season. Speaking of the Ds, they played Port Adelaide. So they go Adelaide to Adelaide. They stay over in Adelaide for the 5 or 6 days in between their two games. But Port and the Ds played off in an absolute beauty. This was the game of the weekend, aside from maybe the Richmond-Sydney match. Big Max Gawn was huge. He was massive. 20 disposals, 50 hit-outs. He was involved all over the place. I loved his game. I loved the game of Clayton Oliver, who looks like he hasn't missed a beat. His ability to just run and gun and win footy and hunt the footy and hunt the opposition is absolutely amazing. Imagine what he's going to look like in the back end of the season, providing he doesn't get any injuries off the back of an interrupted pre-season, interrupted preparation. But his performance is superb. Jack Viney, we know what we get from him. Don't know whether Stephen May will play, and that's going to be a big factor in the game against the Crows. And moving forward, I saw some vision of him, and he looked very sore having had a similar issue with ribs. You must not. And I repeat, Stephen, if you're watching, if someone knows him who is watching, get a message to him. Do not come back early from rib and rib cartilage damage because it is no good and it just stays around. I injured my ribs in round 2 of 2017, came back probably earlier than I should have, and I re-injured them in the last game of the season, some 22, 23 weeks later. They can just hang around for absolutely ever. Whilst we are talking about the Ds, for 7 AFL this week, I really delved deep into Alex Neale-Bullen's role and Christian Petrarca's role. Everyone knows that Christian Petrarca often plays or starts as a midfielder and then bolts forward. And a lot of people are now aware that Alex Neale-Bullen is the one who often starts as a half forward at a centre bounce and will be the one who ends up as the midfielder. No surprise, Dustin Martin, Kane Lambert, they used to do the old switcheroo. We've seen it with Dangerfield and Fife and others. It's a very smart and attacking move from coaches who have players of that level of that explosive nature, those who can run and charge forward and make an impact on the scoreboard, either setting up a goal or kicking a goal. But I just wanted to have a look at, particularly from a stoppage setup, where Petrarca stands, where Neale-Bullen stands, what the opposition does. So make sure you check that out on the 7 socials. To elaborate a little bit, because you do have to be nice and concise on the social videos, otherwise you lose the attention of the young folk these days. So I think the telltale sign is when Neale-Bullen comes up, he stands behind the ruckman and stands in the pocket. That's what most AFL clubs call the position behind the ruckman at a throw-in. So he stands there. And Dan Houston's his opponent. He decides, and I think this is a pre-game decision, a midweek decision where they talk about what Neale-Bullen's going to do and how they're going to play that. So Dan Houston takes 5 to 10 metres ground off the back of Neale-Bullen. So he's goal side 5 to 10 metres, and they call that plus a half. So you haven't necessarily got a proper +1 like you would if you had a deep defender who was a 7th defender, but you get the best of both worlds. So you're close enough if Neale-Bullen turns and wins that ball, you can come forward and put pressure on him. But if the ball does get kicked forward for Melbourne, Houston should be the first one back to make it +1 at ground level. So that's what they call it, plus a half. Now, that's the decision Port made. The tough part is for Houston or whoever plays that role, you go to a stoppage thinking, well, Neale-Bullen's my man at the moment, but I know that I'm probably got to be aware of Petrarca. Then the ball and the game happens and things happen and your mind's racing and you're trying to get the footy, you're trying to get back, you're trying to adjust to what's happening in the game. And all of a sudden, Christian Petrarca's bolted forward. Neale-Bullen's in coverage position for him and you're nowhere. And Dan Houston ended up nowhere, and he's a fine player and a very smart player. So it just shows how difficult it is for the opposition players to deal with this type of thing. Petrarca was able to get on the end of it. He banged it inside 50, and Ben Brown took a big grab. So make sure you do go check that out on Instagram, on X. I've checked that on my TikTok as well, which could do with a few more followers. So go and give that a little bit of love. The 7 AFL socials, a bit of Petrarca and Neale-Bullen. Some of their work in tandem for the Ds, because they are going very, very well. A quick whip around. There's a few things I want to talk about. So Brisbane are on the agenda, of course. I don't think dropping someone like Eric Hipwood is the answer. The 2 ruckman thing surprised me, and it surprised everyone, and it didn't work. So I think they'll go away from that. And Joe Danaher needs to be in the ruck at different stages. He could not get into the game against Collingwood. And he did not have the option of going into the ruck and getting involved and laying a tackle or getting a couple of cheap handballs and feeling good about himself. He was stuck in the forward line for 120 minutes, and he just was unable to get into the game. So I don't think we'll see 2 rucks. I would move now. We know over the past 2 or 3 years, Brisbane have had Hodge and Birchall and Rich and Coleman. They're all gone. All of their ball users are gone. McKenna is and has been injured, but he's not necessarily a creative kick. He's not a general type kick from down back. He takes the game on, he runs hard, and we love the way he plays, but he's not necessarily that creator, that architect. I think Zorko's the best in terms of a kicking element from a personnel perspective. Zorko's the best to go back, but physically playing that role, it asks a lot. You need to be able to stay on the ground for 90, 95% of the game. We know he's had his issues with Achilles and calves and all sorts of things. And he probably at this stage of his career needs to play 3 in every 4 to keep himself fresh, fit, and keep those injuries at bay. So the one I would send back is Hugh McCluggage. I think McCluggage has the creativity, the awareness, the composure, the calmness to play as a genuine halfback. Even if you want to roll him back from the wing, he's the one who can go behind the footy like a Nick Martin. Now, he's probably not as creative a kick as Nick Martin, and he might not run. Actually, he does run incredibly well, McCluggage. I take that back. But why can't he go back there and have the same impact that Nick Martin's having? I'm not talking about getting the ball 44 times. That'd be handy. But they need someone to generate some halfback turnover. So when you can turn the ball over at halfback, so the opposition's centre half forward, they're the hardest ones to defend because the ground's wide. The defenders typically are off their opponents and there's forwards in space all over the place. But Brisbane just don't have that player at the moment who can get or receive that halfback turnover and then just go bang and hit a target and then away you go. I think McCluggage can do it. Now, taking him away from the midfield means you got to replace him. Zach Bailey. Why can't Zach Bailey play 70% mid? I know he's a goal kicker. I know he's dangerous in the front half. But when you've got Cameron, you've got Danaher, you've got Hipwood, you've got Rayner, you've got McCarthy, you've got enough forwards. You need more power and more potency and more damage in the middle part of the ground. So I would send McCluggage back. I'd bring Bailey up as almost a permanent mid, maybe 60, 70% mid. I'd give Rayner a few looks at it as well, both centre bounce and some boundary throw-ins where he can come up and get involved in the game. And I'd even think about Charlie Cameron. He did it when he was playing with us in Adelaide. Of course, when you could have numbers wherever you wanted at centre bounce, he was starting off the back of the square and absolutely bolting through and getting involved. It's a great way to get him involved in the game. It's a great way to ensure that you've got more numbers around the footy, particularly early in games and early in quarters. And it gives their forwards more of a look at it. Now, if he plays the first 15 minutes of the first quarter and he kicks 2 goals, you leave him there. But too often this season, he's been starving. He's been deep forward. He hasn't seen the ball. He's not engaged in the game. And you got to help him to help them. So Bailey mid, Rayner in spurts, Cameron in spurts, and McCluggage back. They're the moves I'd make for Brisbane. North Melbourne, now we know their injury woes have gotten worse because of the injury to Callum Coleman-Jones and that Achilles. I know a lot was made about his teammates not going up to him when he was on the ground and on the stretcher. I do wonder whether that was an instruction maybe from the medical team at North Melbourne just to allow them to do their job and do their thing and not have players coming up and sort of slapping and patting and doing this, that, and the other. I do wonder whether it was an instruction from the Roos to say, look, we know you care and we know you'll be upset and he'll be here when you come off the ground and we'll give you an update, but just let us do our job. Let us do our job in plenty of space and plenty of time and in an orderly manner. I wonder, but I don't think it's a big deal. What is a big deal is he was their second ruck, Coleman-Jones, and he was their second key forward. He's gone. I think Hugh Greenwood was doing some work as a backup ruck in the pre-season. Saw some photos of him wearing a couple of shin guards. Now, he's nowhere near tall enough. He's about 6'3", but he's rangy. He's competitive. He's that basketballer who can jump up and rebound. He's got long arms. Can he compete well enough as a second ruck and then be really damaging at ground level? If he can find a way to be competitive and slap arms and take front spot and nullify the opposition ruckman in the air, and that includes marking contests, then he'll be able to give them an advantage at ground level. So I like the move if indeed they do go that way. Of course, it doesn't help them in terms of a second key forward, but their second key forward, I think, has been playing defence in the VFL, Charlie Comben. He's come off that ankle issue. Now, they tell me they're playing him back to look after himself as much as anything else, because he is a fearless leaper at the footy in the front half, and he can occasionally bring himself undone physically. So they're teaching him to play the game in a little bit more, I guess, composed manner in the back half. So he sounds like he's going to come in and play key defence and try and help them out. I'd bring him in and play second forward ruck and give him that opportunity, but it doesn't sound like he will be doing that. It sounds like he'll be coming in to play key back. And then finally, the power. Well, second last. I've got one more little topic to go swing by you. The power. So I want to talk to you about why expected score doesn't matter. So we're hearing about new stats all the time. And they start to, filter in through champion data and the people that jump on the airwaves and talk from there. And then you've got David King and Lee Montagna and others who start to bring stats to the table. And I would imagine for the casual fan, excuse me, some of those stats just go straight over your head. And I can understand why. And expected score was one that I'd first heard from Don Pike in Adelaide. And I was like, well, hang on, our score is our score. What do you mean our expected score? But it's a whole bunch of factors around, your entries and where you had your shots at goal from and all these types of things. How many entries you had, blah, blah, blah. Now, this is why I think it's a myth. Port Adelaide in their clash with the Ds. Port were plus 26 in disposals, so they had more of the footy than Melbourne. They had 7 more marks inside their forward 50 than Melbourne did in their forward 50. They were plus 15 at clearance, so they were better around the footy all over the ground. They had 10 more tackles, so they got after the opposition as well. They had 11 tackles inside their forward 50, more than Melbourne, so that was a good number. The pressure was there. And they had 21 more inside 50s in general. So the ball was in Port Adelaide's end of the ground more often. They had more tackles. They had more tackles inside 50. They won the clearances. Everything that is supposed to matter, they won. But the only thing that truly matters is the scoreboard. I'm not in love with expected score because the expected score tells us that Port Adelaide should have won that game. But they couldn't put the ball through the goals. Now, last year in the finals, everyone was saying, oh, Melbourne, they outplayed them in the finals. They outplayed Carlton. They did this, they did that. But they just didn't put the score on the scoreboard. Well, guess what? Putting the ball through the goals is the most important part. It's the most important part. And that's why a forward like Tom Hawkins, like Jack Revolt, the guys who don't miss, Jack Gunston, Luke Bruce, the guys who don't miss are the valuable forwards in the competition. And that's why you see fans have frustration with guys like Max King, who might be wayward from time to time, like Eric Hipwood and Danaher can be wayward. That's why there's a level of frustration, because you can win everything. You can win every stat there is. But if you can't put the ball through the big sticks, what's the point of it all? What is the point of expected score? And finally, Jack Ginnivan. Now, it was there Easter Monday, Hawthorn and Geelong. It was a pretty good game. The Hawthorn fans were absolutely up for the fight. There's been an eruption in the aftermath. Laura Kane from the AFL conceded that Ginnivan should have received, I think she said a couple, maybe a few free kicks for high tackles. I reckon he was involved in between 6 to 8 tackling situations where he had the ball and the Hawks fans were screaming for a high tackle and the Cats fans were screaming, saying he ducked, which I know you'll see the irony there somewhat. But Jack Ginnivan has created this problem for himself. He has made this bed and he is now being forced to lie in it. So every time he went for the footy, now go back and watch it if you want to. Every time he went for the footy at ground level, he went looking for high contact. So you'll see occasions where he's got the footy in one hand and he raises his hand to try and force that tackler's arm up over his shoulder. And occasionally he does force it up. But the umpire is saying, well, who's created the high tackle there? Almost every time he went and picked the footy up, he dropped his body height. Now, the umpires are at a point with him, and there are a couple of others around the competition who do it a fair bit, But the umpires are at a point with him. They're saying, well, what's a free and what's not here? Has he ducked? Has he dropped his body height? Is it a genuine free kick? And the umpires are always going to err on the side of, well, that's not a free kick. He's ducked. Because at the moment, Ginnivan is the boy who cried wolf. And the umpires are saying, well, I can't help you, sir. You're going to have to just play on because these don't look like free kicks. Well, in fact, they do look like free kicks, but most of them aren't because he is contributing too much to the high tackle or the tackle around the arm or the neck or the shoulder. So he's got to get that out of his game. Watson did it a couple of times as well at Hawthorn. There's other players around the competition who do it a fair bit. It's ugly. It is one of the ugliest things in the competition. It's one of the ugliest things going around. I absolutely despise seeing that. And I'm not absolutely crucifying Ginnivan because, as I said, a heap of players do it. Every single team has got players who did it. Maybe I did it once or twice. But it's not the way to win the footy. It's not the way to go about it. And Ginnivan is going to have to get himself out of it, just like he got himself into it. So, as I said, that's it for this week. We've covered the main bases. Make sure you do go check out that 7 AFL social video on X, Instagram, and TikTok, talking about the Ds and Neale-Bullen's ability to cover for Petrarca so he can get forward and be an absolute beast. It's a big week in the books, of course. We get the Easter weekend of footy done, and now we all go to Adelaide for the second ever gather round. Can't wait for it. It starts Thursday night, Melbourne and Adelaide, and boy, oh boy, do the Crows need a win. And then Friday night, we've got a double header, and there's footy all weekend. So make sure you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like or a subscribe if you can. Be a friend and tell a friend. Sorry, Pat McAfee, I stole that one from you. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.